Yes, it's like we're live.
Cool. Hi and welcome to the Ignite Developer meeting. Today is August 26th of 2019. And we have a couple of different things on the agenda, quite a lot actually. First, we can start with introductions and, well, tell us who you are and what you want to get out of this meeting so we can be as productive as possible. Well, starting with myself and Dennis, we're maintaining Ignite, part of this thing, but unfortunately this is our last meeting because we're going to Aalto University in a week, or actually less. But yeah, going from there. Daniel, maybe?
Yes, I'm Daniel. I look after all our open source developer community. So I've been involved with Ignite and Flux and all the other things we do. Yes, and I'm interested to see where this community is going and what people want to get out of Ignite and other projects.
Okay, cool. We have Ace, for example.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested in Ignite because I got interested in Firecracker a while back, and I really like the UX of Ignite over Firecracker. I'm just kind of interested in this space generally. I don't have a specific use case in mind. Sort of interested in the Kubernetes style orchestration, with or without Kubernetes proper, but on top of VMs. So that's me.
Awesome. Roberto?
Hi, my name is Roberto Rojas. I work for Aqua Security, and we started getting interested in Ignite and Footloose because we wanted to do some CI/CD on some of the open source projects that we have. But we decided to go another route. But in any event, I've been interested in the project and helping out on things as I have time. So I do a lot of my spare time. It's when I try to contribute. And I'm also interested in some of the things that can be done with Raspberry Pis and Kubernetes and things like that. So I'll be playing with that a lot as we get support towards that. That's it.
Cool. Lee, and we have two Marks maybe on the call.
Oh, we definitely have one Mark.
Yeah, I'm another Mark here too. Mark Emice from Weaveworks. Gonna try and help out as Lucas mentioned. He and Dennis are going to be going to university, so I'm gonna try and help out from a Weaveworks perspective on some of the maintenance and the community aspects of Ignite.
And I'll be around as well to help maintain Ignite from the Containerd and GitOps toolkit perspective currently.
And I'm Mark Ram, also from Weaveworks. I'm product manager. I'm interested in lightweight VM orchestration and container orchestration to build Kubernetes on top of and use with GitOps stuff. So just paying attention to what's going on over here.
Cool, and then we have Nathan.
Hi everyone. I discovered the project maybe 2 weeks ago. I work at Cycloid, and I'm searching a way how I can help the project.
Awesome. Nice to hear. So we don't have any immediate action items as of last week. But other than, well, getting containerd GitOps toolkit 052 and that kind of stuff progressed. Anyways, 052 has been released. I just put it up there. Basically, a small bug fix release. We discovered a small bug in the Docker implementation of port mappings. So now you can still, as before, there was small regression with regards to binding ports in Docker mode. So this will help us with the upcoming Footloose integration, so that you can basically use the Footloose format for running Ignite VMs, the thing that also Roberto talked about. Yeah, and then we have the containerd integration. I think that Dennis could maybe speak to that point a bit.
Yes, is my microphone working? This is a new setup, I haven't tested it.
Yes, it's working.
Okay, great. Yes, so currently we have a container runtime backend in Ignite only for Docker. And to expand upon that, we've now been implementing a containerd backend for Ignite, which basically means that instead of Docker, we're using containerd to pull the images and then manage the VMs in their own containers. And this work, which is all collected in this one PR, basically implements the basis for containerd integration. It's not yet in a usable state. We haven't figured out removing or haven't implemented removing and VM lifecycle management yet, but it is possible to pull the images and start VMs in containers already with the containerd backend. For now, it's disabled, however, by default, and we'll add a switch for it, and then maybe also in the future enable it by default when it's ready. But for the time being, it's just a proof of concept code that exists alongside the Docker code.
And to be clear here, so well, actually, I'll share my screen to show the. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. So taking a quick look at the architecture diagram. So basically, how Ignite works, it uses container runtime to import OCI images, and then also to run and isolate Firecracker, the process itself, and integrate with networking. So these three tasks the container runtime is used for in order to integrate well with the container space, which is the whole idea. So here in the first, on the left-hand side, with OCI, with regards to OCI images. So instead of using the VDI or VMDK formats for VMs, we just pull a Ubuntu, for example, from Docker Hub and combine it with a kernel image. Another OCI image containing stuff needed for your kernel modules, for example, and the kernel itself and other utilities. Then these are like pulled with Docker pull or containerd equivalent, and then basically put together as a block device with device mapper into something Firecracker can consume, and then added a writable overlay. So we can use copy and write on top. And then when issuing Ignite start or Ignite run, a container will be started with Ignite spawn as PID1. Ignite spawn's task is then to start basically translate the API that Ignite has into Firecracker commands. Firecracker has a small small HTTP server on a Unix socket. So Ignite spawn configures Firecracker so it starts running, and then also handles the networking. But in order to get this container up, we need some kind of container runtime. And then previously, this has been done with all Docker, but as it's been requested a couple of times, Containerd doing this task is well enough and a lot more lightweight and efficient in doing these isolation and running pulling tasks. So that's the idea behind it. Any questions on that topic?
I do have a question, but I don't know if it's necessarily for this topic. It's related to I noticed that you now have a new executable that started, the Ignite-D. So can you comment anything on that?
Yeah, so how Ignite-D fits into this, right? I can share my screen again just to make it easier to show. There we go. So at the moment, when running Ignite, it requires root because when creating the block devices in this step here in the read-only OCI images and write-only snapshots, in this step we basically need to issue a mount command. So we mount the block device into a temporary path and do our modifications there, make it fit with the container requirements and then that kind of stuff. And that is obviously not ideal to have your client of something to have to be root. So hence we've started the refactor towards Ignite-D. And now, needs to run as root. Okay, so Ignite still has the same UX. What Ignite-D, as of the last 0.5 release, has is the GitOps mode, which basically pulls a Git repo and reconciles on the content there, and also pushes back. So in order to see how an example of how this works, we can go to Ignite GitOps and see that here I have my VM, which is the declarative format of I want to run CentOS 7 with these parameters, etc. And then I put that in a Git repo and start Ignite the GitOps help. I specify the branch, the repo URL, basically in SSH format, like that. And it's going to pull the repo, look that, oh, I have a YAML file here with Ignite specification. I should definitely run that. And then reconcile on doing so. So we had a screencast in the earlier thing, but that's one mode, and you might want to use it. You might not, depending on the requirements. So the refactor is gradually going towards daemon mode, where the client basically puts stuff that should be run in etc Firecracker manifests, which is similar to the static pod feature of Kubernetes, the kubelet. So the kubelet normally functions as that it talks to the API server and asks what should I be running. However, for example, in KubeADM, we utilize the static pod mode, which means that before it even has an API server that it can connect to, it can just read a directory and disk. In Kubernetes, it's like etc Kubernetes manifest, and but it's that kind of, well, very similar. And basically, you just drop a YAML or JSON file in there with a pod, and then Kubeless starts this pod up. So the idea is exactly the same, that if you run sudo ignite daemon, well, now I had some test data there, sorry. So there we go. And when you put something in here now, in etc Firecracker manifest, it's gonna check through iNotify. It's gonna get the event through iNotify and start the thing here. So eventually, with that kind of process, we will be able to not have to act as root. Maybe we'll add some web server, gRPC, similar kind of thing. It depends on what people would like, but this is essentially the same. The manifest directory is basically how GitOps works too, except for that with GitOps we clone the thing into a temporary directory and watch that, and push and pull, because, well, GitOps then can do like pushback status updates as they happen, like that. Does that kind of answer your question, Roberto?
Yeah, it does. It does. I was thinking that it was some sort of that it would expose some sort of the functionality somehow to the, but I guess that's where when the gRPC comes into play, right? Or
yeah,
is it going to be like a gateway type of thing, or will it be only used like locally command line, and then it goes towards the actual ignite to fire up VMs? Is it?
Yeah, I guess that eventually with this you'd start up. So now we have a couple of different subcommands of ignitd and similar. I don't think that will be necessarily the case in a long time. And eventually ignitd has just one mode, and you configure it with a config file. So, for example, say that I want to run in GitOps mode, or I want to run in like have a manifest directory, or I want to actually listen on some kind of gRPC server, for example. And then the default would be like the gRPC server and combined with the manifest directory. So, and then the client would be like containerd. So like a containerd has its containerd. Oh, well, so yeah, like that. Let's see the permissions of this. Yeah, so something similar to what containerd does. When it starts up, it starts this socket, and then the CTR client talks to this socket. And now in this case, you need to be root to connect it, but you could add, like, you could do the same as a Docker group or similar. Maybe with some deb package would automatically configure that for you. So that's most likely the long term, but we took it in steps, basically, to not do too much at the same time.
And to also add a little bit to ignitd's role here, is that currently Ignite is a single call binary. So whatever you call ignite run, it downloads the binary, downloads the OCI resource, downloads everything, constructs your VM, and then starts it and then quits. And the VM is then left run in the background with the config file of the VM tracking its state. And there we have an issue. If the VM stops suddenly, or we have a problem with the VM, there's nothing monitoring the VM while it's running. So by having a client daemon model, IgniteD would be always running in the background, monitoring the VM state, and then performing any status updates, any logging, any issues detecting while the VMs are running, so we don't lose the information.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and like why we went with the single core binary to start with was for simplicity and to be able to prove that the concept works and like have good user stories before we do something more complicated, which a client-server model is. Then you need to start. You might want to start think about authentication, authorization. I don't know, or other more advanced stuff than just like handing most of the stuff over to the container runtime and filling the gaps in between. Very well. Any more questions on that topic?
I was going to ask around if you had considered creating like user groups on Linux to allow non-root to interact with Ignite, similar to how Docker does it. You know, if you try and interact with Docker on Linux, you can't. You have to be root unless you add the Docker group to your user account, and then you can interact with Docker directly. And I was wondering if you guys had thought or considered doing that as well, or instead.
Yeah. So why? Yeah. So that's eventually when we get the full client server model, that will be the case. That you basically just set the permissions on the socket that IgniteD is listening on to something with the Ignite group. And if your user joins the Ignite group, then you can use Ignite without like sudo. But at the moment we don't have that socket because of starting with the simplest form possible. That is a single core binary. And then, well, why whatever that is actually implementing Ignite needs to be root is the same as why Containerd or Docker kind of needs root privileges for mounting and that kind of stuff. It's issuing mount calls and other a bit more high privilege stuff. Eventually, one good thing with the Containerd refactor is that we have a smaller base to rely upon, which is good for security, but also Containerd supports, well, maybe Docker supports in some extent too, but Containerd has at least a bit more documentation that I've seen about user namespaces. So you could run Containerd in totally user mode without root privileges at all on the host. So as Containerd has that functionality, it might or should be possible to make Ignite support the same thing.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Lucas.
Awesome. Then Footloose. So do you want to Roberto, did you want to say something about the Footloose integration, or should I talk about why we want it?
Well, you know, since you started, I can always like talk about the little things I did, but you know,
yeah,
you started it. So basically, you know, there was the first VR that Lucas created. Started most of the part of the integration of Footloose and Ignite, and then I took some of that or all of it and did a little bit of refactoring and added the way I guess the way to check if the VM is created. I believe I also worked on the stop and the delete. I'm trying to remember from the top of my head. But anyway, and then this past weekend, I guess we fixed a few issues, some of with the delete and the show. So basically, at the moment, we have the ability to create a cluster, and then the cluster is going to go and turn around and call Ignite and ask for any VM in the cluster and create the VM. It has the ability to tell it, hey, there's a list of files that we want to copy into the VM. So we added that facility. And then once it's running, then you can run a show, the show command on Footloose, and that would, again, turn around into Ignite and run, I believe at the moment we are running an inspect. Yes, running an inspect on it. And then basically we just unmarshal the JSON that comes from Ignite and turn around or map all that data into, and I'm trying to remember, we map all the data into an internal object of Footloose, and then that goes back and shows that into to the console. That's what I'm doing. And then when it's deleting, we just remove. I know that there's a little bug that was found where we had to check before if it's created before removing, and the stop should be working as well. So those are the things that I can remember from the top of my head. I don't have the code in front of me, unfortunately, but I guess at one point we could show a little demo that I have, which basically I decided to use libvirt, and just to make it easier for people that don't have necessarily root access, so that they can run on a VM. And then inside of that VM, I have a script that goes in and sets up Ignite, it sets up Footloose, and then it runs, it creates a simple Kubernetes cluster of one master on a control plane and one worker, and then it deploys one of the projects that I'm working on, the Kubebench, which is a job that runs and checks certain things on the kubelet configuration, and then it does all that end to end. So I'm working on a blog on that as well. So that's what I've been doing so far. Did I miss anything? I probably missed a lot.
I think that was really good. So a really quick demo of this is with Footloose at the master branch. Is a font readable? Cool. So on the master branch, you can use Footloose with Ignite, as Roberto explained. And the only difference basically between how to use Ignite and how to use Docker with regards to Footloose is you set the backend to Ignite instead of Docker. Docker is still the default, but if you set Ignite here, you can, well, it's going to use Ignite internally to make the VMs happen. You can use the same images as Footloose, or you use Footloose. You can use the same Footloose images, or you use the ones we've built for Ignite. Doesn't really matter. And then optionally, you have some more configurability if you use the Ignite backend. You can also say how many CPUs do you need, but that's optional. Anyways, how it works is this is like Footloose YAML here. So I do a Footloose create, which is going to start these VMs. And then I can do a Footloose show and see that here I have 3 VMs running, all working fine. If I do PS with Ignite, we see the same thing. They are up there running. I can SSH into, for example, VM0. And, well, there we go. it's all working as before, and it's using the cluster. There's a cluster key that's being created for SSH stuff with Footloose as normal. That's used for the SSH connections here. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's a quick demo. Then you do Footloose delete and your VMs are gone. So that's really nice work.
Lucas, can you scroll up just a little bit? It looked like on your configuration you set the size to 5 gigabytes, but the size as reported from Ignite said 4. I'm just curious. Just was curious about that. Unless that size column on there is not matching up the size that you passed to from Ignite.
Yeah, that's a good catch. Actually, maybe it's just there was some bug in.
I was just curious. No big deal.
Yeah, that's probably the volume as we are taking the inspect data coming from Ignite and showing it. Probably it's not matching because it's using either a default or something like that. But that's a good catch.
Yeah, we'll fix that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a bug. Looking at an oversight, it should be the same. They use the same parser library. But yes, good catch.
Cool. So, any questions about using Footloose with this? So, we're aiming to tomorrow release Footloose 0.6 with Ignite support, and then this can be done with a released version too.
Very cool.
Perfect. Then GitOps Toolkit. Lee,
Yes.
do you want to talk to this?
Yeah, so Lucas and I published this project into the Weaveworks org, which means we're really committing to maintaining GitOps Toolkit, which is ultimately a project that aims to provide the primitives necessary to write a controller that is similar to what we've done in Ignite for GitOps support, as well as some of our other projects like Flux. And we really push this idea of operating state through a Git repository with transactions that are collaborative between developers and operators, people, human beings that are interacting with our systems, as well as the feedback that comes out of the systems using Git as a state store, or a database, as you might call. And so Ignite is vendoring this library now, and it's not at the moment incredibly consumable from a documentation perspective, as well as some of the interfaces and examples need to be improved and moved into a more working state. For the next couple hours, I'm actually going to be working directly on that to improve the onboarding and usability of the project. And so if you are interested, please just reach out to me. And also take a look through the code. I mean, the stuff in there is already being used, so it's not just vaporware. And, yeah, does anybody have any questions about what GitOps Toolkit is kind of for, or maybe like if you're interested in helping?
I can just extend on that a bit. So this is basically code that's been broken out, that generic code from Ignite that's been broken out. And this Google document, as said, Lee, is going to turn into Markdown really soon. But basically, we have a client which is very similar to, like, the inspiration is from the client Go of Kubernetes. So you have like client dot your type, then get set patch delete list, find similar things. The client is talking to a storage, and the storage has the same methods but generic. So like operating on arbitrary objects, and the client provides then just pretty much just type safety. And the storage is backed by a raw storage, which has directory file system-like functions like read, write, delete. I mean, similar. And the good thing about this split is that, well, the default implementation of raw storage is like, well, a directory on disk, providing this abstraction of the file system. But you could also have like the Kubernetes API, or like, well, we have one Git Git implementation or suited for that, or you could have the storage to be at CD or somewhere else. But that's the abstraction. And then finally, we have Serializer, which the storage also consumes, which uses the Kubernetes API machinery. You've seen that the Ignite specifications are, or like the Ignite API is similar, not the same, but similar to how the Kubernetes API machinery looks like, or Kubernetes API objects look like. And that's because we're using the same machinery and standards, the patterns Kubernetes has taught us. So, and then we have optionally, you can embed a cache between the client and the storage. But then also to implement GitOps, we have some more different types. For example, Git directory, which basically, like, given some inputs, configuration, it pulls, clones Git directory into some path, and periodically syncs the origin, so that when it finds a new commit upstream, it's gonna fetch it and check it out. Then, but also the other way, that when something status is updated from Ignite, for example, we had a specification in the Git repo that we should be running a VM, but then Ignite pulls it down, does the thing, starts the VM that we ought to have. Then we get some status back, basically, or for example, an IP address, or like how large it is, and similar. Then that's written to the Git directory, and it's Git directory notices that and pushes upstream. And then different watch storage is basically what we use. Watch storage and mapped raw storage is what we use for the manifest directory. So that's a generic implementation of a storage that supports iNotify or being iNotify based for a specific directory. And mapped raw storage allows you to have a directory where you can have YAML files spread around, like in any subdirectory, basically in the Git repo, and then it's gonna map the. Here I actually have the file, but well, it's gonna map the API and UID and group, version kind, that kind of stuff to the actual path. So you don't have to have structured content or a specific. Hence, we might want in the future, like dictate or say that if you have a Git repo, it should be structured in this way. But at the moment, it's just, you can have your files anywhere and Ignite will, or like this GitOps toolkit will detect them. So that's a bit about how it fits together. But this also means that you could, for example, as Lee said, write arbitrary applications. So like you could write a web server that is backed with a Git repo, or a reconciling loop on some Git repo with information, declarative state about how you want your system to be run.
And also to help Lee, I will be moving some documentation and also writing a lot more documentation about specifically the watch storage, how the notify system works and other stuff. So it's easier to understand the whole interaction between the various storages, and then also to integrate the correct solution you want in your application. So all of that API side documentation still needs to be written, but I will help Lee in that with that.
Cool. Any questions about that? Okay. If not, then let's proceed. We have 15 minutes left. Maybe we'll take Lee's question first, or
Oh yeah.
pointer.
Well, I started looking into virtualization options on macOS. I know that previously on this call, people have been looking for better development solutions to get involved with the project, and the options are pretty limited, especially for freely licensed open source software. I found that VirtualBox 6, you can do nested virt on AMD CPUs, which is not very helpful for the majority of Mac OS users. Does anybody use like any maybe paid or freeware solutions? Just by chance that are supporting nested virt? Because there's really not much out there.
Yeah, I did the same research. I was trying to find something that would support that nested virtualization. That's why I started playing with libvirt on the Mac, because again, I don't have any Linux box with AMD CPUs. All of them are Intel. So the libvirt route was the only one that I was able to find, at least on the Linux side. But then I couldn't find a supported, I don't know, maybe a plugin or adapter to the virtualization on the Mac for libvirt, because that would have been like another path, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, libvirt on the Mac is going to be client only,
But on the Linux side, you should be able to use Intel CPUs. I mean, that's what I was using, right? Sorry, maybe I misunderstood what you said, Roberto.
For the VirtualBox with Intel, at least I haven't been able to get it to create nested VMs.
That's not supported yet. So there's two technologies. I think it's SMV and VTX. And VTX is the virtualization support for the Intel architecture CPUs. Mm-hmm. And the VTX is a lot more complicated, apparently, is what the VirtualBox devs have been saying. People have been asking for nested virt through VirtualBox for like the better part of 9 years. I found some really old threads, and very recently they were able to implement the AMD support. So that only came like last April or something along those lines. So if you are running like Ryzen, or any of these AMD CPUs that are relatively recent, then you can use VirtualBox 6. But otherwise, and I mean, I guess you could run, Mac OS. That'd probably break the end user license agreement on an AMD CPU. But like an Intel Mac is not going to be able to use VirtualBox to nested virtualization. And so then Roberto was saying, well, on Linux, like you can use the libvirt stack, right? And KVM, or QEMU KVM totally works too. And as long as you've passed through the VTX support, or the SMB support for your AMD CPU, then those machines are going to be just fine to run nested KVM virtual machines that are needed by Firecracker. And but my question then is like, okay, well, there's paid software like Parallels and VMware on the Mac, and if we have a need, right, then I can go figure out how we can do a nested virt setup, hopefully with some repeatable code or an image that we can distribute. But it's tricky. Yeah, like there's not really anything out there on a Mac OS machine right now that we can use and like really promote as a repeatable setup for devs to get started, is I think what I'm kind of finding. So I'm curious if people are using some virtual machine manager on Mac OS that allows nested virt, because otherwise think we have to table this one for now.
So what could solve the issue is, well, basically using something else than Firecracker as the like VM runtime. But also I'm thinking, oh no, yeah, doesn't really work. Because on Mac you're already in a VM, yeah, when running Docker. So yeah.
I mean, yeah, you would have to rewrite the storage stuff too, you know.
Yeah.
Have something compatible.
Is the same problem? Does the same problem exist on Windows with the nested virtualization? I assume it. I'm sure, pretty sure it is with VirtualBox. I wasn't sure about other things.
Yeah, you'd be right on that. So on a Windows machine, there's nothing wrong with running Windows on an AMD processor. So VirtualBox 6 has support for nested virtualization.
So you could do it there.
And that's just VirtualBox, right? Which is free, licensed, and open source. Also, if you're using Windows 10 Pro or any of the insider builds, you have access to some Hyper-V VMs, and you can do nested virtualization easily with Hyper-V.
Okay, one of the things I was trying over the weekend was trying to run with the Linux subsystem for inside of Windows, and I didn't have any luck with that on Windows.
The second one, WSL2?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I didn't spend a lot of time on it, so anyway.
Yeah.
Sorry, we were talking about the Mac stuff.
No, this is actually important too, right? Is if we've got Windows people. And you're going to need a new kernel for the WSL2 support.
Yep.
So Ignite requires some device mapper modules which are not built into the default Windows Subsystem for Linux 2 kernel. Even though it has KVM virtualization enabled, you need to do a def config build with some device mapper thin provisioning and snapshotter modules enabled. And they recently, in some insider build, if I recall correctly, enabled you to build your own kernel for the Windows Subsystem for Linux 2. It hasn't been attempted yet, but it should technically be possible to build a kernel with the required modules for Ignite that will then be able to run Ignite and Firecracker VMs inside of Windows Subsystem for Linux 2.
Yeah,
the first one doesn't work.
Kernel also has to have everything you need for containerization support. They already have some built kernels that we can start with there. Because things like Containerd won't work out of the box in WSL2 until you load the appropriate kernel.
Yep. Do you know, so you mentioned Hyper-V and VirtualBox and that kind of stuff. Do you know what Docker for, like Docker Desktop, what kind of virtualization does that use?
So xHive is a port of BSD's bhyve. And then instead of using, it's using macOS's virtualization frameworks, which are native. And neither xHive nor macOS's native virt interfaces support nested virt.
All right. Well,
yeah.
That's about
so unfortunately, that would have been wonderful, right? If we could do nested virt inside of Docker for Mac, but not a thing.
Then it would have worked kind of out of the box.
It would have worked perfectly. Yeah, there would be no problem. So.
Okay, well, we have 5 minutes left. Don't think there's a lot more. I just linked a presentation I did at an Aarhus meetup. I was in Denmark last week. Presented about Ignite and how it works well with Cluster API and basically these ideas. Also a bit about Raspberry Pi. It would be nice if Roberto and myself and the rest of the team could get it working on Raspberry Pi 4. Well, we'll see if that happens. That kind of thing. Then we had talked about the code walkthrough / architecture was requested on Slack. I'll try to make that kind of document. So the best we have at the moment is the architecture diagram that is in the README, but it could be fleshed out to like a fully written doc that explains all of the different things too. So I'll try to make that happen this week. Any other questions?
Nope, nothing.
Cool. I think for this week we'd try to get 0.60 of Ignite out with the containerd support, and basically the containerd support would be the only thing we add, but that release would come like 1.5 weeks after 0.50, so it's or something. So it would be pretty new, or like pretty fresh, just before we go to university. Try to see that. Yeah, I don't think there's any more agenda items. Anyone wants the last word? Okay. Well, we got one thing in the chat. Okay. We then get 4 minutes back of our day. A lot. Cool. Yeah. Thanks for attending, and bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye now. Thanks.
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Bye.